Hey, thanks for stopping by. My name's Thomas, and this is Zarbo Audio Projects. Today, I'm going to show you 8 tips and tricks that I use for speaker building and woodworking in general to make doing what I do easier, faster, or perhaps just less problematic. We're going to move quickly, so let's get started. You know, no matter how careful we try to be when working on a project, sometimes dings and gouges, well, they just happen. When I need to patch one of those dings up on a project that I plan to cover with veneer, I don't grab the wood filler. Instead, I usually use a mixture of sawdust and Titebond 2 wood glue. Yeah, I even DIY my wood filler. How about that? If my project is made of MDF, then I use MDF dust to patch it up. I have a few different types of sawdust to choose from when making my own custom patching material. This works for screw holes as well as dings and deep gouges. To apply, just scuff the area you need to patch for good adhesion. Mix together some glue and sawdust on the scrap board using the minimum amount of glue that still lets it spread nicely. You'll have to experiment a bit with this. Then apply with a squeegee or putty knife as you would any filler product. You want to press the material hard into the workpiece before you start adding thickness. Then just add as much material as you think you'll need to cover the repair. Then sand it smooth after it dries. The one caveat I have though is to go easy on the glue. Use too much glue and your repair will be hard as a rock, which makes it difficult to sand smooth. Yeah, I know it might sound strange, but think about it. All you're doing really is using small pieces of MDF to patch MDF, which is basically wood dust and glue anyway. It's the same stuff. Honestly, I've done this dozens of times with zero issues. It really does work and it's almost free. Here's a tip when you're drilling 1 to 2 inch and larger holes for, say, a vent, terminal cup, or small driver. Drill your initial hole all the way through your material with a small 1/8 inch or so drill bit, so your larger drill bit can find the center of the hole from both sides. Then you drill in with your larger bit about halfway through the material, and then come in from the other side to finish the hole. Doing this prevents tear out of the back side of the hole. This is especially a problem in flaky MDF or particle board. There are times though when you can't drill in from both sides to make that hole. And in that case, and only if you can do it safely, place a scrap of wood against the back side of the board that you're drilling into, like I did with these smaller holes. That will also help prevent tear out of the wood. Like I said though, be careful. I would never stick my fingers anywhere near a spinning Forstner bit, even with a 3/4 inch board between me and the bit. It's just not worth the risk. You gotta be smart when you're DIYing. Look, I hate to be dogmatic about woodworking and speaker building because there are usually lots of ways to skin a cat. But trust me, you should always pre-drill screw holes for drivers, terminal cups, almost anything really on a speaker project, but especially the drivers themselves. I can't tell you how sick of a feeling you get when you're driving in a screw to mount a driver into your beautiful speaker project, you're almost done, and bam! The screw tips over and you send the screwdriver right through the surround of the speaker. Luckily, it's only happened to me twice in my lifetime of building hundreds of speakers and subwoofers, but it's a bad feeling, trust me. Even on a $3 junk driver, it makes you sick to your stomach. And you can greatly reduce the likelihood of that happening by just pre-drilling a hole for your screws. It takes more force to drive a screw in virgin wood, and when you have a properly sized screw hole already there, the screw is much more likely to be driven into that hole straight and true. Trust me, always pre-drill. And here's a tip within a tip. What size hole should you make to pre-drill for your screw? Well, take the fastener you intend to use, get a drill bit that looks to be close to the size of the shaft of the screw, the solid part in the middle, not the screw flutes themselves. If you drill a hole the size of the flutes, there won't be any wood left for them to bite into. You want to make room for the shaft of the screw so that it doesn't split the wood. But let the flutes of the screw carve their way into the wood as you spin the screw in. If you're screwing into hardwood, the drill bit has to be as big as the shaft, or else you will face a ton of friction and resistance when you screw it in, and you may even break the screw. For MDF, particle board, and most plywoods, you can go a smidge smaller on the drill bit size if necessary. For this number 6 screw, this drill bit looks just about right. Speaking of drilling screw holes, here's another tip that I often utilize when using screws and soft MDF. After I drill the hole, I run one of the same screws I plan to use in and out of each screw hole to kind of create the threads. But then I place several drops of super glue in each hole to firm up the fibers of the MDF and allow them to better hold the screw. I think this really does help, especially where the wood you're trying to get the screw to bite into is on the thinner side, or when you're using a smaller size screw with smaller size threads. This isn't needed for hardwood, but for particle board, MDF, and some softer woods, I think it can add a little strength. Here's a big tip. Whatever finish you intend to apply to your wood or veneered project, test it out first on a scrap of that same material before you attempt to apply it to the final product. I know from experience that it's an awful feeling to get so close to being done a speaker only to have a finish gum up or not adhere properly to your enclosure. Yeah, it's true. Some finishes don't play nice with some species of wood. For example, here's a speaker I designed called the Esoteries, which I covered with waterfall Babinga veneer, which is a species I've used many times before. But this particular batch of veneer, for whatever reason, just did not want to let the oil-based polyurethane stick to it. It dried blotchy and the poly just wouldn't adhere correctly to some areas. Had I done a quick check for compatibility on a scrap piece of veneer, I might have used a different finish and I would have prevented a lot of extra work. Some species such as Babinga, Ipe, teak, and rosewood are more oily than others and may require pre-treatment or alternative finishing methods. Try your intended finish on a scrap every time. That's my tip. I've been building speakers for years, and the fancier and curvier I got with my speakers, the more I found I needed to create jigs and templates to create the speaker shapes that I wanted. I often use 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch MDF as a template for making multiple panels that need to be exactly the same size. I use MDF because it's cheap, it's consistent in its makeup, unlike plywood whose end grain is less likely to be smooth because of the alternating layers that it's constructed of. After I get the template machined and sanded to where it's basically perfect, then, and here's the important part, I rub some wood glue into the end grain where the router bearing will ride against and let it dry for an hour or so before using it. Why would I do this? After the glue dries, it firms up the MDF and prevents the bearing from the router bit from pressing in and making an indentation in the MDF end grain over multiple passes. Check out this piece of MDF that I repeatedly ran a small roundover bit over. Yes, believe it or not, the bearing from a router bit can easily dent the end grain of MDF, causing the last panel you machine to be slightly different than the first. You can see by the end of the second series of passes that there is a noticeable indent in the end grain, from a 32nd of an inch to just about a 1/16 of an inch. Depending on what you're making, that could be a problem. We tend to put more pressure on our router bits than we realize. And I know I joke around about it a lot, but MDF is basically glorified cardboard after all. So rub some wood glue into the end grain of any template you plan to use more than a few times, and you will have perfect copies instead of ever shrinking ones. One of the struggles with veneering has to do with the way MDF and other woods can show their end grain over time through the veneer. This is especially visible in glossier finishes, but shows up really with any finish. The end grain over time will swell with changes in humidity, where the flat face of a board will not really move. This creates a raised portion on the veneer where the end grain is, and you can see it telegraphing through the finish. There are several ways of dealing with this, but the best, easiest, and cheapest way I've found to remedy this is to cover that panel with a piece of 1/8 inch HDF, or high density fiberboard. It's stiff enough to resist the movement of the underlying panels, prevents most humidity from penetrating, and it doesn't have a thick enough end grain itself to telegraph through when veneering adjacent panels. It really is a good cheap fix for this problematic issue that we all eventually face when veneering or painting projects. I've done this many times, and I've had zero telegraphing issues using this technique. When you're building a speaker, the quality of your final result will be a combination of all your design choices, as well as the attention you put into the details. Details matter. So here's another tip for you when mounting drivers in your speakers. Take note of where the driver mounting holes will be. Most speakers have either 4, 6, or 8 mounting holes. So try and align them to either the vertical or horizontal plane of your speaker. Sometimes the proximity of other drivers will help dictate how you orient a particular driver, as in this speaker, the cellos. Because of the closeness of the tweeter to the midwoofer, I decided to not mount these in the normal cardinal or 2 holes horizontally on the top and on the bottom orientation. Had I done that, I was afraid that the screw hole might interfere with the mounting of the tweeter, which was already pretty tricky, as you can see. So I went with a cardinal, one hole at the top and bottom mounting option. And as you can see, for continuity, I continued that mounting methodology with the lower two woofers, which I oriented the same way. But my point is that I put some thought into it. I've seen some folks online just literally throw the driver in there and just drill screw holes wherever the driver lands. Cockeyed or straight, didn't matter. That's okay, it works, but I think it could look a lot better if the driver mounting holes were oriented in some logical way. All it takes is a T-square of some type and a few seconds. So as you've probably gathered, most of these tips were learned as a direct result of a screw-up of some type. So don't ever feel bad about messing something up or thinking, I can't do something as good as those guys on YouTube. Trust me, if I showed you all my outtakes and screw-ups, some of my videos would probably be twice as long as they already are. And I also say I'm comfortable and confident enough with how I do things to share them with you, because I know they work. But of course, feel free to leave a comment on how you handle some of these issues. I'd love to read them, and we'd probably all benefit from your input. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.